Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now on our 7th episode of 2024. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. Last week, our first regional Fiber Connect workshop was held in Richmond, and it was our largest and most successful regional event to date. We just had an amazing lineup of speakers, including Dr. Holmes from the State Broadband Director of Virginia, Joey Winder from Treasury, and I got to do a fireside chat with former FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. So it's an all-star lineup, and we can't wait till our next event. We'll be in Little Rock on April 16th, then we'll be in Deer Valley in June, Des Moines in September, Albuquerque in November, and of course, our big annual Fiber Connect 2024 conference will be in Nashville, July 28 to 31. So you're not going to want to miss any of those. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Chip Pickering of ENCOMPAS, Quinn Jordan of MSBA, and Adeyinka Ogunlegan, the Education Superhighway, to discuss what happens to Mississippi without ACP. But before I introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you everybody for joining us. Good morning. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if you would all please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located within the control panel on the side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's discussion. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option, again on the FBA website. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to respond. We really appreciate the input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to introduce our panelists and get us started.
Thanks, David. And good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Ned Brody, the founder and CEO of Actify and partner at Foundry.ai, who discussed an AI guide for broadband CXOs, what's real and what's hype. Ned walked us through between three different types of AI: natural language processing used in call centers to convert speech to text, generative AI such as ChatGPT, and what he believes to be the most useful form of AI, prescriptive AI, that can be used to solve business problems by predicting outcomes from inputs and recommending actions. So if you missed it, go to the FBA website to see the replay. This brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session. As of February 8th, that was last week, the Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, the largest and most successful broadband adoption program in our nation, stopped accepting new enrollments. Without additional funding from Congress, it is anticipated that April will be the last month currently enrolled households receive their full ACP benefit, and this is a national issue. But today we're going to be drilling down on the impact of the ACP wind down on broadband affordability in Mississippi in a session titled, "What Happens to Mississippi Without ACP?" with Chip Pickering of ENCOMPAS, Quinn Jordan of MSBA, and Adeyinka Ogunlegan from Education Superhighway. Chip Pickering has been the CEO of ENCOMPAS since January 2014. Chip was also a 6-term congressman representing Mississippi's 3rd District. During his time in the House, he served on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where he was vice chairman from 2002 to 2006 and a member of the Telecommunications Subcommittee. Because of his role in drafting the 1996 Telecommunications Act, he has been well known as a congressional leader on telecommunications issues. Adeyinka Ogunlegan is the Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy at Education Superhighway, a national nonprofit with a mission to close the digital divide for the 17 million Americans that have access to the internet but cannot afford to connect. Prior to joining the Education Superhighway, Adeyinka spent several years at Comcast, where she was responsible for legislative advocacy and building partnerships with community-based organizations to close the digital divide. And my buddy Quinn Jordan is the executive director at the Mississippi Broadband Association. and is an accomplished executive with a passion for bridging the digital divide and creating opportunities for all Mississippians. He has had successful careers in various sectors: telecommunications, private business, and governmental management. Quinn is committed to ensuring that every Mississippian has access to affordable high-speed broadband services. With that, welcome Chip, Adeyinka, and Quinn. And for audience, please type in your questions to go and work them into Q&A at the end. With that, let's get things started. I'll turn it over to Chip.
Gary, thank you for inviting me to be part of this morning and this very important discussion about the ACP program and what it means to a state like mine in Mississippi. But you could also say, what does it mean for Kansas or Montana, every state in the country? And what I'd like to do is just kind of step back and how did we get here, and what does it mean going forward? If ACP ends, and this very important and critical component of our national commitment to bring broadband to every American, every home, to close the digital divide, and to give everyone the opportunities and the services that are really critical to every home, every family, every business, every community. ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, came out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed in 2021. As we, as a nation, came out of the pandemic, this program actually was established and started with the FCC during the GPI Commission, and when he was chairman, and the emergency broadband efforts to bring connectivity during the pandemic, when everyone learned how essential broadband services were to every home, to keep schools, businesses, and everyone connected during that time. As we went into the congressional legislative process, there was a consensus that we needed to provide enough funding to meet the needs in unserved and underserved markets for the deployment. Gary, your companies, the companies that I represent in Encompass, the competitive fiber companies, national, regional fiber companies, the companies you represent, the Fiber Broadband Association, there is a broad consensus that not only do we need the funding, the $42.5 billion that was authorized in the infrastructure bill and will soon be awarded state by state so that our companies, incumbent and competitor alike, can build and deploy networks. But what about the affordability issues, so that for those low-income households, whether they are a senior, a veteran, or a family with children trying to be connected for homework, for those who are seeking jobs, for those who need telemedicine, for the veterans, and all of the different types of communities and families and populations across the country, the ACP has been tremendously successful. Over 23 million households have signed up. Represents a significant percentage of all the people, not only in Mississippi, but around the country. And it allows our companies also, and it's very important to note, not only does it help families sign up and have connectivity, but it helps our companies that are building have the business model and the economic case to be able to deploy into rural parts of Mississippi, rural parts of America, into those hard to reach places that are both remote and the low income communities, and build not just to high income and mid income parts of the cities and towns and suburbs and rural parts of the country, but also to build everywhere into every community. So this is a critical program, and as we face the cliff of having it turned off and stopped this April, there are a number of bipartisan leaders in Congress, House and Senate, that are trying to extend the program and find the resources to implement any reforms that would allow us to continue this vitally important program, but also one that is very critical to connecting every American, every home, both in places like Mississippi and around the country. With that, I'm going to turn it over back to you, Gary. I'm glad you're giving us an opportunity to have this conversation. I look forward to my friend Quinn and Adeyinka what they have to say.
Thanks, Chip. And Adeyinka, can you walk us through what's actually going on in Mississippi?
Sure, absolutely. At Education Superhighway, everything that we do is founded in data. So especially when we talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program and what it means, not only nationally, but in our state partners like Mississippi. So David, if you could advance to the next slide, please. So $14.2 billion was allocated, as Chip said, to get the Affordable Connectivity Program as a transition from the emergency broadband benefit. Really, this was the first time in our nation's history that money was allocated to address affordability. Up until that point, the digital divide had really just been considered an access issue. But at this point, we had a mechanism to really lean into the affordability aspect and get under-resourced households in all parts of our country connected to the internet. Our estimates are that 51.6 million households across the country are eligible for the Affordable Connectivity Program. Right now, there are about 43% of those households that are actually enrolled and receiving the benefit up until enrollment paused last week on the 8th. If you could go to the next slide, David. But why is addressing affordability such a key issue? As we all know, the digital divide and digital equity in general, there are three key barriers. The first one being connectivity. If you are not connected to the internet, you can't even begin to have the conversation about what it means to participate in virtual learning, remote education, even remote working, as well as telehealth and all the other things that the internet provides. And we saw that in great detail during the pandemic. The other barrier is equipment. I mean, if you're not connected, having a device, as we sent home many students with Chromebooks to participate in virtual learning, without connectivity, having a device at home means nothing. And then ultimately, digital literacy. As Chip mentioned, we want people to participate in all of the opportunity that our country has to offer. And that starts with making sure that all three of these barriers are addressed. So finally, with the ACP, we had a critical tool to close the digital divide and really tackle the issue of affordability. In the state of Mississippi, we know that almost 1.1 million households live in the state of Mississippi. More than half of them are eligible for the ACP. And we also really drill down in what it means to be an unconnected household, meaning that they have access where they live, but affordability is keeping them offline. Over 452,000 households in Mississippi are unconnected. And that's a significant chunk of the households that are eligible for the ACP. Right now, only 40% of those households are connected and enrolled in the program. But even that 40% pretty much tracks with the national average of 43% of households that are enrolled. So we see that not only is there demand, but people are enrolling in the program as awareness grew, as there was money rolled out by the FCC with their grant programs, as local organizations got involved in supporting folks with enrollment picked up. And we are at this point now where more than half of the people who qualify for the program are taking advantage of it nationwide. But 234,000 households in Mississippi are in jeopardy of having their connectivity either completely interrupted or seeing their internet service bills go up, depending on how they are leveraging the benefit. We were really in a critical place where we were trying to get that other 361,000 households enrolled in the program to really tackle the challenge of affordability in Mississippi, really leaning into community-based partnerships, working with school districts, working with providers, to really make sure that we were doing our best to not only raise awareness about the program, but tap into the trusted partners that were doing the on-the-ground work to drive adoption. And with the ACP now paused with enrollment and funding in jeopardy, not only are those 234,000 households at risk, but also the future connectivity for the remaining eligible households is also in jeopardy. But what does it look like on the ground? Like, who are these people? Who are these households that are taking advantage of the program? Our data shows us that over 28,000 of them are veterans households. That's how they are eligible for the program and participating. 122,000 of them live in rural parts of the state. We also know that 72,000 of them are seniors. These are critical communities that we know rely on internet access for so many things in terms of access to healthcare, running their businesses, keeping their children educated, and accessing all the resources that the internet provides all of us. So this is what the numbers break down to in terms of who's impacted, who's currently taking advantage of the benefit, and whose connectivity status is in jeopardy.
All right.
All right,
Gary,
well, I'll turn it over to Quinn. You're on the ground there in Mississippi. Tell us what's going on.
yeah, I want to first say thank you to Chip and Adeyinka for what they're doing nationally and also in Mississippi. They've just been great partners. And Gary, to you as well, just being a sister organization to MSBA has been both an honor and a privilege to work with you to overcome these obstacles and these barriers. I think we need to tell a story. I think we need to tell the Mississippi story a little bit. And the way we do that is we take a local ISP. So we have an ISP in the Mississippi Delta, Belzona Cable. They're a fiber growth company. They were legacy cable moving into the fiber industry, but 25% of their networks participate in the ACP program. So what happens to, ISPs and groups like that are going to substantially lose a large portion of their subscribers, but also, as Chip mentioned earlier, how do they look at expansion? If we're going to look at covering Mississippi in these rural areas, because that's going to be the challenge with BEAD is in where we're going to invest, is those areas that it just does not make financial sense without some type of injection of funds. How do we ask these ISPs to go into rural Mississippi, and then you can just take out Mississippi and just say rural America, without being able to sustain these networks? And unfortunately, there's a parallel between those expansion in rural areas with also the ability for those individuals to afford. And so, there's just this balance here and impact that ACP is going to have on both sustainability of existing networks and the interest to expand. And so I think we have to tell that story first before we kind of move into the call to action. The time to talk is over. We've talked about this. We've met. Now we're in the wind down. We're in the wind down of one of the most successful programs that has allowed people not just to sustain their lifestyle, but to build and to improve their lifestyle. Without connectivity, these individuals will not have access to the digital economy or the services that they afford. So what are we asking, and what are we encouraging people to do, not only in Mississippi but around the nation? Is we've got to continue to push on Congress over the next, I'm gonna say the next 2 weeks, 30 days at the most, to find a way to fund this program. There has been a bill that has dropped by Representative Clark out of New York, introduced that $7 billion allocation bill that was also it was introduced in the House and in the Senate in a bipartisan, hopefully bicameral solution for the program. But what's going on the Hill? What are other things that we can do to get toward these individuals? I know Chip runs the Pineapple Group and does a great job with them and their advocacy on the Hill. There's also an ABC coalition. And again, I would encourage you to look out to these groups and join these groups because there's strength in numbers. One of the things you can learn about the ABC group is go to donotdisconnectus.org and learn more about what they're doing at the national level to encourage this bipartisan, bicameral support of expanding, and I mean, it's not expanding, but funding ACP through the end of 24. But unfortunately, ACP has some challenges. And so I know that there's some talk on the Hill about some reform and recommendations. So at this point, Gary, I'd love to open it up to questions from you, as well as the audience, about not only what's happening in the introduction, what's going on with the numbers, but also what the call to action is here in Mississippi and around the nation.
Well, thanks, Quinn. Last summer in June, the FCC reported that 20% of Mississippi did not have high-speed broadband access. So that's a pretty big number. And I think, Adeyinka, you said nearly half, or if half of Mississippi qualifies for ACP, which are huge numbers. According to a recent Cartesian study, it says that Mississippi's their BEAD funding is $1.2 billion. You're going to have a $434 million match. So you're going to have $1.6 billion. And the Cartesian study said that Mississippi can deploy fiber to 100% of the BEAD eligible locations and have $366 million left over for BEAD eligible expenses such as workforce development, affordability, you know, how should Mississippi be prioritizing this $366 million from BEAD?
Well, one of the first things is workforce. You know, I don't know how you install the biggest infrastructure bill that's probably ever been introduced. This also, as we know, a workforce bill without workers. And so I think we need to be proactive as a state to really invest in workforce and workforce development. You know, Mississippi's biggest asset is our people. I mean, I think once you educate and train our people, we're hardworking, loyal individuals that really want to see and buy into a culture. And so if we can, you know, invest in that workforce side, in my opinion, that's how we change Mississippi. That's how we change not only the individual's lifestyle, but also their quality of life and being able to provide. You know, we live in the times where interest rates are high as they've been in a long time. Of course, not nationally high historically, but they are high for the last decade or so. But also inflation. You know, it just costs so much to feed a family. And if we can equip these individuals to better their social economic conditions by training them to be a better employee, but also a better citizen. I mean, you know, just giving them the tools and access to the tools through workforce development, in my opinion, is one of the biggest things they can inject that money in.
So Chip, being a former 6-time congressman, you kind of know how it works up there on the Hill. I'm kind of flabbergasted. I mean, it seems like the current theme on the Hill is this brinkmanship. This wait to the 11th hour to fund the government. This wait, you know, so waiting doesn't seem to be very good for something like ACP. But do you feel like the FCC is kind of weak in their argument that, hey, we have no money? I mean, the Congress did appropriate $20.4 billion for RDOF. They spent about $7 billion, and they came back to Jessica and said, hey, you got $13 billion. And she says, well, no, not really, because we didn't never collect that from USAC, from USF. I mean, can't we just keep this thing funded from what was appropriate?
You know, everyone has been desperately looking for how to fund this any way that we can find, either through the FCC, existing funds, or through congressional action. There's consensus that Congress must act for this program to continue. And just kind of stepping back a little bit, as we've discussed this, one thing to think about, and for our policy and policymakers and congressional leaders to think about, Medicaid, as they connect through telehealth and are providing critical healthcare services, what we've discovered is that through connectivity, we actually reduce the cost and improve the outcomes and healthcare into whether it's rural hospitals and rural communities and individuals. The VA hospitals and has also learned the same thing, that telehealth and telemedicine and connectivity give veterans and senior populations much better outcomes and saves the VA money. If we look in the educational and the workforce, the community colleges, the connectivity makes everything more effective. And then the economic opportunities and growth that comes through having more of our small businesses, our farms, our homes where people are working from home connected has a tremendous economic benefit. So not only do federal programs and state programs save money through connectivity, but our economy grows as a result of connectivity. And so this program enjoys broad bipartisan support. As we watch Congress struggle to get anything through right now, big things to small things, I'm hoping that the bipartisan nature of broadband connectivity and deployment, affordability and accessibility is one thing that will allow a solution to be reached and then congressional action to fund it before it's too late. The BEAD money, the $42.5 billion, is about to go out. It needs to be paired with and combined with the affordability for it to be completely effective. And if you lose one component of it, it damages the other side of it. Again, this is a smart thing to do from a fiscal As a conservative, as a Republican, as a rural state, this is the fiscally responsible thing to do. And it helps us achieve the national commitment of connecting every American. And we see in Mississippi how large of our people are affected by this. And so this is just really, really important that we find a way to do it. It's not for the lack of support. It's just a lack of action that is keeping us from achieving the last steps of connecting every American.
Well, certainly, to your point, Chip, it is bipartisan on the recipients of ACP. It looks like that there's 11.7 million Democrats that are receiving the benefit and 10.7 million Republicans. So it's pretty evenly split on who's receiving the benefit. Adeyinka, can you tell us, I mean, as Chip said, this is a huge investment in people, and this will actually relieve the pressure on the budget if we are able to pull all these ACP recipients out of low income and be able to become productive members of society, be able to have better opportunities for job, healthcare, education. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. There have been several studies published looking at what the benefits of home internet access provides. And there is one study that actually shows that home internet increases the annual income of an under-resourced household by about $2,200. So if you talk about like the economics of what internet means, not only for Mississippians, but under-resourced households across the country, it can be very game-changing for a household. I think a lot of the conversation, especially in the middle of the pandemic, was about remote learning for students, K through 12, making sure that they can participate in the classroom. But overall, in general, we know that internet access creates opportunity for jobs. It creates opportunity for higher education for adult learners. As Chip already alluded to, telehealth, it brings down healthcare costs. So there is a real monetary value associated not only with the program and the benefit that it provides households, but in the overall economic benefit to households, communities, states, and the nation. And we have made this down payment on the connectivity future of our country, but this is a critical piece of it, making sure that people can get connected to the networks that we're trying to build, and that we also lift every household to the point where they can also participate fully in our society.
Well, one of the questions, there's tons of questions and a lot of support for everything you guys are saying. It sounds like our audience is strong believers in how important ACP is to the future of our nation. But one of the questions is there any chance that we're going to get this funding? And I know FBA stands behind Senators Vance, Welsh, Rosen, Kramer, and Representatives Clark and Fitzpatrick on the Affordable Connectivity Program extension, which is $7 billion to get this funded through the end of the year. What do you guys, are we going to see this legislation get through, and what's the timing? And
well, what I'd like to wrap up on that is that we're in a kind of a stage in Congress right now, and that where we're looking for being physically responsible, but also making sure that we're meeting those needs. And so I know there's some talk on the Hill about some possible reform to the program to be included in that $7 billion, kind of reducing it and getting it more in line with Lifeline, the Lifeline program, removing that $100 device, and then also one of the blanket qualifiers on free and reduced lunch. Again, it does not remove anything or take away from the program, other than finding a way to get some bipartisan cooperation to get this over the hump, because and Chip, I know you would speak to this way better than me, so I'm going to yield the floor over to you as you would normally hear, but talk a little bit about that and why this reform could help this bill get over the hump.
Well, as we look at the $7 billion, there are some concerns with the program, and then how does it become sustainable for the long term, not just in the present crisis, but long term. And so those types of reforms that can help us make the program, both from a fiscal point of view, more sustainable and more targeted to the population that needs it most. We would support whatever reform allows us to move forward and sustain and to get the critical funds needed to continue and to be tied with the BEAD deployment funding that is coming out around the country later this year. Senator Wicker, as we talk about Mississippi, has been a great champion for broadband throughout the country and in Mississippi and for rural America. He supported the infrastructure bill, Congressman Thompson in the House. There's a bipartisan commitment of trying to find solutions here and whatever reforms can make it possible to get the support and the action in Congress for the time that we have left. Look, Congress is struggling with everything right now to get funded. I think if they ever break free on the big things, something like ACP can find a home somewhere in one of the bills moving. And if reforms help make that possible, we can be more supportive. And as Quinn mentioned, we have large coalitions. The broadband industry, from the incumbents to the competitors, from rural, from small companies to big companies that are deploying internet services around the country, all support this. Consumer groups, education groups, every type of organization around the country supports this. There's really no opposition. We just need to find a way to get it done and to move as quickly as possible before it's too late to lose this very important component of connecting every American.
Well, Chip and Adeyinka and Quinn, really appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts, insights, and expertise on such an important national issue. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to get back together next Wednesday. We'll be speaking with Kevin Sheehan from Siena to discuss how different types of services like video streaming and AR use networks. You're not going to want to miss that. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll get some action on this.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.